further ado, I give you Mr. Bill Dranginis.
I want to thank Billy for inviting me to the conference. It's a long time coming for here in Virginia. There's been a lot of sightings over the years, and Virginia, I think, is one of the better spots. It offers a lot of state parks, a lot of waterways, power lines, things like that these creatures utilize. I started working back in 1990 for a government contractor called Household Data Services. They did a lot of work for government, more specialized work, surveillance, cameras, audio recorders, things like that. A number of the things were deployed all over the world, so it's pretty interesting work. I started as a machinist apprentice, learned how to become a machinist, went through the training, got my certificate, started working in the model shops, things like that. Then I was afforded a great job at a company called Household Data Services, where it was a small group of talented individuals that worked together to do quick reaction contracts. It means building all types of devices for the government, whatever they would need, but more geared towards the surveillance aspect of things. So we had a unique group of people, all engineers. We could manufacture everything from circuit boards to software, things like that. We had a good team. During those years, I learned to become a locksmith. Went to FLIR training up at Billerica, Massachusetts, to learn how to utilize FLIR equipment, more for detection and forensic needs, things like that. So during those years, I had a lot of time to learn new skills also. Did a lot of work in forensics with light scope forensics, that sort of thing. Fingerprinting. Did a lot with mold making, plastics, plastic injection machines. So a lot of experience in a lot of different avenues. But in 1995, I was invited to go metal detecting with two friends of mine. Both were FBI agents, worked out of Quantico. One of the gentlemen owned land right across the street from a pulpwood company near Richardsville, Virginia, which is about just a few miles north and west of Culpeper, Virginia. Right along, it's actually in the area called the Forks of the Rapidan. It's an area that is bordered between the Rapidan River and the Rappahannock River, and those flow combined together in Fredericksburg. The area used to be an old gold mining area. It was Virginia was the biggest producer of gold prior to the gold rush in California. So down in that area, which is across the street from one of the agents' home, they have all these different mine shafts, cave pits, processing areas. But when the gold rush hit in California, Virginia, they just dropped everything and went west. So there was still some machinery there, shovels, things like that. So it was pretty interesting. So we went metal detecting back there thinking we were going to find gold or gold coins or something like that, and also Civil War relics. We were metal detecting most of the day. We got out about 1:30. We decided to head home. And on the way back, we were going along a logging road, and there were the two agents in front of me. I was in the back, still metal detecting. And it was a beautiful day. We didn't see anybody all day. Then it was about 1:30, I think. The agent that did 3 tours of Vietnam, he put out his arms and he said, "Stop." And we stopped. I sort of ran into the back of him. And then he said, "From my shoulder to the tip of my finger, 75 feet and beyond that tree is a man." And I was like, "What's going on?" Both of them drew their sidearms and pointed it down towards a tree. About 3 or 4 seconds later, where I'm looking, expecting to see a person, this head pops out about another 3 feet higher, peeks from behind the tree, looks at us, and draws back. And I just said, "Jesus Christ," because there was something there, but it wasn't a person. It was a large black cat, much, much taller. And it saw us, and it hid behind the tree. And these guys are trained law enforcement agents. I thought all hell was going to break loose. But then about 3 seconds later, this thing started running, basically like this. We were walking along the logging road here. The agent saw movement on his peripheral vision, and that's when he put his arms out. Then it peeked out behind the tree. All of a sudden, it started running from our left to right, 75 feet away, almost at 180 degrees, and then it started running downhill. And when it was running downhill, it took a hard, quick left turn to go downhill. Later we found out that the creature actually pivoted off a pine tree and pushed its foot against the pine tree about a foot up. And it actually compressed the bark of the pine tree down to the ground and sprang out about a foot from the tree after that. But what was interesting with that sighting was that basically there was two of us in shock. The agent that I knew that invited me to go metal detecting, it wasn't the same agent that lived across the street. I ended up seeing tunnel vision after the thing just came out from the tree. And all I saw was a tunnel. And all I could see was from about the shoulders to the hip area. But that area was sort of magnified a little bit for some reason, experiencing the tunnel vision. And as it ran from left to right, my vision opened up and I saw the whole creature, the arms, the legs, the muscles, the hair blowing in the wind. And then when it turned the tree, I saw that. When it turned quickly, I thought that was very strange because it was so fast. And that's such mass that how do you do that? It's usually an arc and it goes down. But, and as it went down the hill, we could see the shoulders, which were 4 feet wide. And they were going back and forth, just this big heaving motion, boom, 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 as it went down the hill. And we saw some patterning, gray patterning in the back. It was, and what I found out later, that it's called primate patterning. And that happens in primates too. You could tell age of the primate from the patterning, patterns on the body. It went down the hill, basically went out of sight. The agent that lived across the street said, "It's a bear, let's get out of here." And so the other gentleman sort of bumped me a little bit with his elbow, and he looked down. And the agent that lived across the street still had his hand on the revolver, finger on the trigger, and his eyes were bloodshot and sweating. And the agent pushed me back and said, "Okay, yeah, it's a bear, let's get out of here." So I was actually in the back. My buddy was in front of me, and the other agent that lived across the street was in front. So we walked about a half mile through the woods and down under a buried pipeline, and didn't say a word. Everybody just kept walking, walking, walking. We crossed the street, went into his parking area where he parks his car, and then we say goodbye to him and thanks for letting us metal detect. And he didn't say a word. Got on his side, just kept walking into the house, shut the door. So the other agent and myself got in his car, we went down the road, maybe a quarter mile. He pulled over and turned off the car and he says, "You know what we just saw?" And I said, "Bigfoot?" And he's like, "Yep." And I was pretty excited. I thought, wow, this is crazy. And then he looked at me and he said, "This is as far as it goes with me." He said, "I have a job. I'm going to keep my job. If you say anything and include me in my name, I'm going to deny it." And he let me know point blank that it was, that's the way it's going to be. So I respected his request. I found out later that when this gentleman saw it on his peripheral vision, he said that he saw movement first, and then about 2 to 3 seconds later, this creature looked up right into his eyes, and the agent said, look on both of our faces as though SH double hockey sticks, so, or something like that. But he was so, just with Vietnam and that sort of action he's had in the past, he said that that creature didn't know that we were there. It wasn't like it came out and just saw us and kept walking. He said it had time to see us, think real quickly, and what did she do in defensive mode? And so it hid behind the tree. A few seconds later, it looked back, it saw our position, where we were stopped. But the funny thing was it kept running from our left to right. All other Bigfoot encounters are usually the creature turns around, walks away as soon as they spot humans. This one, actually, what the agent said, because of his tours with Nam, he thinks that the creature did that and ran in front of us to draw our attention away to what could have possibly been behind it. A mate or a family unit, and it did. And the agent bought it because he said, I can't believe it, I got had. So very, very interesting 10 to 12 seconds. When you see something like that, it just turns your whole world around because you're seeing 75 feet away isn't anything. It's from here to the corner of the room. And when you see the movements of the creature, they're so fluid in it's just an amazing thing to see that much mass just sort of floating through the woods. The agent also said there was no sound at all. I was still in the television thing, so I didn't hear anything, but he's pretty observant. When it went down the hill, we thought that that was it. So I ended up calling the agent a couple of days later and said, I'm going back, and he said, don't go back. And I said, well, I'm going. I want to go see if there's any tracks or anything like that. And he said, all right. He says, you know, I'll go one more time. I'll basically make sure that nothing happens to you. So we went down there. I was in the area where we were on the logging road. He went back into the woods, saw the trees. He said, yes, this is where it was. Took out the stick, 7 feet tall. He estimated the creature was 7 feet tall. And then he started walking the path while I was still at the observation point. And we saw, he said, and he goes like this to me, and by the pine tree, I walked down there where it turned, and he said, look at this. And you could see the pine bark that pushed down and accordioned out and just sprung out, and it was still oozing sap. And he said, this is where it turned. And so we started going down the hill, and we both saw at the same time. There was a little creek down there. Right along the side, it was all mossy, and there was a break in the moss. And we both said, do you see that? And he said, yeah, I see it. So we slowly walked down there, and there was a footprint right in that little sandy area. Perfect footprint, clear as could be. You could see the heel, the foot, also the toes. What was interesting in the toes is the toes were curled under like this. When I went in to touch the toes, you had to almost go around underneath and then feel the toes. So what happened was it jumped actually about 12 feet and landed on a fallen tree that was about 18 inches in diameter, because there was still dirt from the same dirt that was in that little stream. But what happened was it actually curled its toes when it jumped, and it compressed that soil and that sand so it had something to jump off of. And at the time I had a friend of mine that was an Olympic hopeful, and I asked him about that, the curled toes, and he says, yeah, he says, I know some long jumpers that go barefoot. And he said when they go, they jump and curl their toes, they dig in, compress the soil, and then jump off of that. He said otherwise if they went and jumped, they would slip. So the dynamics of the foot showed that there was a purpose when it jumped like that. So subconsciously that thing just ran down there, knew what to do, curled its toes, jumped. Taps me again, and he does one of these things. And I'm like, what's that? He says, there's 2 of them out there. And I said, 2 what? And he said, there's 2 of those creatures, and they're circling us. And he had an AK-47 and 2 sidearms. And so I was like joking, and I said, well, let's just get this thing and we'll go. And then he said, listen. And you could hear these little whistles going on back and forth that I didn't hear before. And I said, yeah, I hear them. I think those are birds. And he goes, they're not birds. He says, I survived Vietnam in my gut. My gut says, get out of here now. And I was like, well, let me get this cast, you know. And then he says, no. He says, I'm out of here, and so should you. And so the look on his eyes, his hands on the rifle, just everything reeked that I got to follow him, because I'm going to be dead if he leaves me here. So we ended up leaving, and we went about 75 yards or so, 100 yards, and we started going up the hill. And as we're walking up, we heard this blood-curdling scream from the same area that we were in about getting the print. And he looked at me and he says, I'm never coming back, and neither should you. And that was it for him. He was gone. We saw each other maybe 4 times over 10 years in the grocery store, and he would say, how are things going? And I said, good, good. It ended up where I was interviewed by Daniel Perez. He owns the track record, Bigfoot track record out in Riverside, California. He interviewed me at the Bigfoot conference in Ohio, I think 99. And it was about 4 years ago, he asked me if I could get the agents to tell their side of the story. And I knew one that still lives down there in Richardsville. He wouldn't talk to me for anything, because I spent about 6 months, 8 months down there doing research in that same area, putting cameras under the ground, burying them, armored cables coming up so the rodents wouldn't eat the rubber and the wires. Had wireless cameras, PIR sensors scattered through the woods that would trigger once something came in with heat and motion. So the wireless signal underground turn on a recording system, a video and audio recording system for a minute, and then go back to sleep. So I had this capture area with video about twice the size of this building. And that was the recording area that had some strange stuff happen, with sticks being thrown into the field of view from behind it, just like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the stick would go boom, land in front of it. Had flies buzzing around it at certain times. At night, usually 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning, the system would activate, and because of the high-end audio microphone, I could hear the footfalls of this thing as it was coming closer to the camera. And so after reviewing this, I was like, wow, there's something coming up to the camera. But one time it actually walked up and I could hear the heavy breathing and then the tapping, which was like that. And I heard the heavy breathing again and then it walked off. The last time that I had the camera system deployed, it was a Saturday morning. I was going down Saturday morning to remove the batteries and look at the footage. And when I was reviewing the tape the next day, I found out what happened. But about 1 o'clock that morning, something walked up to it, and I could hear this crunching sound, and that was it. So it was at nighttime, so it wasn't doing any night vision capabilities. It was just daytime camera. But it ended up where a leaf was put right in front of the camera lens, and all the leaves up top were green. This leaf was flat from the forest floor. And I don't know what it was, but something put a leaf right in front of the camera lens and blocked it. So when I went down there that morning to retrieve the system, I saw that leaf in front of the camera lens and went, you know, this thing has got me. So, but an interesting part about the research with the cameras down there was the camera was recording deer and things. And the deer would come up to the camera about 10 or 15 feet away, and their ears would be going back and forth like this. And I'm thinking, they're hearing something. So I ended up learning about the hearing of deer, the audio they could hear, and wavelengths and things, and frequencies, and ended up buying an ultrasonic leak detector, which is used, they use it for bats, to hear bats clicking for their echolocation. So I ended up taking the camera apart, putting it back together on a circuit board, plugging it in, and that thing screamed in the ultrasonic range. It sounds like a beehive, electronic noises, things like that. So what was happening, I'll show you this circuit board. These circuits and things like that all have basically an electronic hum to them. And when they do hum, some hum in the ultrasonic range. And when that ultrasonic gets transferred through the component itself, it goes to the circuit board, and this becomes like a resonator. And this thing will just sit there and hum in the ultrasonic range. So I was able to get the ultrasonic detector and actually use the probe tip they have and touch each component and found out which one was producing that ultrasonic sound. So then I used a lot of different types of automotive sound deafening sprays, things like that. And it did kick the ultrasonic sound down quite a bit. So, but what was really interesting was the gentleman that lived across the street. He had a contract in our building for about $3 million. And after about 6 months down in the woods, I would park right in his driveway, but I never saw him. But he would let me go back there and metal detect. But it was surveillance stuff instead. But he drove all the way up from Culpeper to our building. And nobody, you just can't get it. You have to be somebody to get in there. But anyway, he came up into the shop, looked around, nobody was there. And he looked at me again. He still had those glassy eyes again, red eyes and everything else. And he says, whatever you guys spooked up down there is coming up to my house at 1 in the morning. My dog's howling like he got stuck with a hot poker. And he says, my wife is telling me to shoot that thing that's standing right I don't think they live in caves or anything like that. I think they live below ground, but I don't think they live in caves. I think they live in burrows they dig. Creates a perfect environment, 56 degrees year-round, out of sight, out of mind. The babies could be raised there. They could store food. I think they do eat earthworms. I've seen some evidence of earthworm devices that they make out of cedar bark that looks like they peel cedar bark and chew, and they make a little nest out of it. And at night, the earthworms and things come into the wet, moist cedar bark and just congregate in there. And then I think they come by and just grab it, empty it out, and put it back down. I've seen that at a couple different properties along the East Coast here. So there's a possibility the earthworms are actually good for you, a lot of protein. So it's just an interesting observation. But that sighting really flipped my world around. Back then it was 1995. The internet was just coming up. I did an internet search on a company called Alta Vista. They came up with the Bigfoot Motel in California, and I called them up and I said, who do I report this to? You know, and he said, well, there's a guy up in Portland, Oregon, in Ray Crow, and he gave me his number, so I called up Ray Crow. Ray Crow had a newsletter called The Track Record, so we went out to a lot of researchers and things. So I talked to Ray. He took down my story. We talked about it. He sent me to Peter Byrne, who was doing the Bigfoot project in the Dallas, Oregon at the time. And so I called Peter Byrne up, told him exactly the same story, and he said, quit drinking, stay out of the woods with guns. There's no Bigfoot on the East Coast. And he hung up. So I was like, huh. So it ended up where I said, you know what, I'm going to find this thing. I figured 2 years I'd find it. With the background and the surveillance and the equipment, I figured I'd outsmart it and get it on film. That was back in '95. But anyway, it was sort of funny because in 2000, I think it was 2009 or 2010, I spoke at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, and I shared a cabin with Peter Byrne. So we shared a drink over it and became friends again. But it was an interesting sighting. It really changed my life for the better, I think. It got me into the woods more. It's funny, when you go into the woods, you learn more about yourself, which I did, and I think that was very beneficial. It's actually better than seeing the creatures again, I think. But you learn a lot being in the woods, and you respect it more. So instead of the aggressive person going after Bigfoot trying to capture it, it's more to try to learn its ways and somehow meet him again. I did take a shamanic awareness class up in Townsbrook, Virginia, learned the ways of the Indians, the fox walk, the sweat lodges, remote viewing, things like that. I went into that thinking it was either a bunch of bull or the real deal, and I came away with the real deal. It's some very interesting stuff happened up there. And I think it benefits the research with these creatures. I'll go ahead and carry on with this guy here. Right now I'm working for Battelle Memorial Institute up in Springfield, Virginia, Northern Virginia. I was a former senior science technologist for 22 years, and now I'm a building manager for a cybersecurity facility. Became a FLIR thermographer through part of the job, and also model makers that have to do with the urethane castings and things like that. I have some samples back there, the footprints. This is a little bit of the area where we had the sighting. Metal detecting with the two agents looking for gold. There's Richardsville with the mark up top. You can't really see it in there, but there's the Rappahannock River that goes over the top, and then right below is the Rapidan. Where we saw that was pretty much right in the middle of the screen is where we saw the creature. The gentleman's house is along that area there with the open fields, and then the Rapidan River is right below. It's much accentuated river right there. But we walked about halfway through those woods, and that's where we had the sighting. And that was all owned by a pulpwood company, and is still owned by a pulpwood company. But that area is where all the gold mines were. Sightings in Virginia, I started the Virginia Bigfoot Research Organization just as a whim to see if other people had seen Bigfoot in Virginia. I advertised through the Virginia Electric Co-op magazine that goes to all the rural areas for electricity. And I was inundated with calls from state police, doctors, lawyers, farmers, hunters, it's just amazing the calls that came in. So I ended up talking to these people and taking their stories and putting them in a database. And it ended up where I wanted to go to those locations and try to see what they were experiencing and also leave camera equipment. So I would develop the camera systems, night vision also, and I would leave them set up at the site where the people could monitor them 24/7. So I built a number of these systems, but the unfortunate thing is they cost a lot of money. And trying to get a system away from an observer like that on their property, it's very difficult because it's like fishing. They sit there at night, all hours of the morning, waiting for something to come into view. So it was very time consuming, it cost a lot of money. But what I realized was that most of the sightings that came in were rural areas. And here I was, sort of this ambulance chaser in the RV, going out, spending nights on weekends and stuff at their property, waiting for something to happen, and it never did. After 5 years, 6 years, nothing happened. Never saw a Bigfoot with a thermal camera or anything. So what I did was learn that I got to become rural. So I ended up buying a cabin in West Virginia, up near Romney, West Virginia, and did a lot of research up there. I'll expand on that in a little bit. This is the one that was at the Culpeper location. This was the underground camera system. Everything was buried in a Pelican case, all waterproof. Camera's on the right side up the tree. That's the leaf that's over the front of it. You can just about see it. But what would happen, the wireless sensors would be stationed around the area, send a wireless signal to the cam system, turn it on, power it up for 1 minute, and go back to sleep unless there was more activity. But that's the one, that's the camera with the leaf in the front of it there. And that was about 6 to 7 feet up where that camera was placed. Just a couple of stick structures. I think there's some rhyme and reason to their existence. Had some theories, but haven't been able to work anything out yet. I think they are some type of indicator or sign that these creatures utilize. Some of the other ones down in the Culpeper area where we had the sighting, the one at the bottom right, the apex at the point where they meet, that was 16 feet tall, pretty big. And a lot of the roots were placed at the top. The one in the upper left, that was added to over time, but even though I had the plot watcher camera there, I still never got anybody added to it. Basically, the Virginia Bigfoot research is still in existence. We do take sightings. Try to follow up on reports. Some of the better ones, we still leave the equipment there as much as possible. We're doing a lot with audio now, because since you can't be in the woods all the time, usually at night, placing audio recorders throughout the woods where there's action and getting some interesting results back. Equipment technology, this is 98, 99. Thermal camera that I built. The actual enclosure is a 3D printed object with plastic. That was back in 99. That was my first hand at doing thermal stuff. Current thermal imaging, the bottom right is the handheld that I have. That's sort of the Judge Judy when you talk about Bigfoot research, because if there's something going on, without the thermal, you could look, but you're hearing what you think is a creature walking around. With the thermal camera, it'll tell you what it is, a rabbit, a deer, anything like that. So there's no second guessing what you're hearing. You point it and shoot and look. Haven't seen a Bigfoot with the thermal cameras at all. The top right is the Night Sight 200. That was a Raytheon unit. That was on top of the RV. The lower left shows it on the mast. The mast would go up to 25 feet, look around 360, displayed inside the RV, and recorded if there was anything there. Just some of the different types of thermal, color thermal, things like that. Pretty interesting stuff. This is back in, I think, 2005 or so, 2006. Billy brought his crew up to West Virginia. We had the thermal camera set at red hot, which means anything that's, what I did to program it, since I went to school, it was actually a benefit. Learned how to program the cameras. I programmed this camera so that you determine the ambient temperature. You bring it up about 2 degrees so that anything ambient temperature a couple degrees above would be black and white. Anything above ambient would come up red. So instead of scanning a hillside where you have all these different colors of the rainbow with the cameras that were out there, because the camera I had was radiometric, you could program it for different temperatures. So this way you could scan a whole hillside, everything was black and white, but if there's something just a couple degrees above ambient temperature, it would be red. So it's really easy just to, as a go, no-go type gauge. This is the Bigfoot research vehicle, extendable mast that came out of the back. Up on top was a receive antenna, directional receive antenna, because I would put thermal cameras in the woods with video and audio transmitters to transmit back into the RV. Those would be about a quarter mile away, pretty high power. But those would be stationed around the area. And then on top of it was a 360-degree camera. So from inside the vehicle, during the daytime anyway, you could see 360 degrees if anybody was coming up to it. This is the inside of the vehicle. It was a mobile vet clinic when I got it. And I sort of cleaned it up and put a new floor, couch, and all that sort of thing. That upper left photo, the sofa on the right, the far end of the sofa, Jane Goodall actually sat on that sofa and we talked Bigfoot. It was supposed to be a 15-minute meeting with Jane Goodall down in Washington, D.C. It ended up being 2.5 hours. And she sent her helper into her hotel and she came out with a box full of audio tapes, video, and things like that. And she says, this is all the information people have sent me. So we talked for a little while and then we exchanged email addresses. And she said, I have some signing reports I need you to follow up on. So I was like, wow. You know? So it ended up where for almost 6 to 8 months, I would follow up on her reports, talk to the witnesses, and then get back to her through emails. And then I would receive letters from her as she was around the world with her letterhead in Gandhi and all sorts of places with pictures and having a great time, but would rather be searching for Bigfoot. Because of her work with the chimps, she has created a family of people to protect the chimps all over the world. And she says, I wish I could break away to do the Bigfoot research. I'm 100% sure they exist. She says, the sounds I hear are human, primate, and something else I can't put my finger on. So, but because of her family, she has to keep them fed. So she has to keep going around and giving speeches to raise funds to keep everybody. Pan and tilts, and it was pretty neat. So we went in there, I went in there, talked about Bigfoot and everything. The kids came out, all had their chances of using the pan and tilt mechanism for the thermal. Kids would be running around the field, and kids inside the RV would be watching and laughing and having a good time. But it did show how their question was, how do you search for a creature that the scientific field says does not exist? So this is what I basically came up with this and did this to a few schools. And it's very educational for everybody, not just the kids. Inside, doing more talk, had the cameras up there, thermal cameras, things like that. They just loved it. One thing I do say is distrust assumptions made by others. Experiment, observe, and document instead. That's a big thing for me because you just can't, if you think you see a Bigfoot and you call it a Bigfoot, but you don't have any real solid evidence, then you shouldn't talk about it too much. You know, some people do see it, and if you don't have evidence, you don't have it. You got to believe somebody some of the time. I'm going to go ahead and put up the other one. This was an interesting one because a lot of people are curious why they haven't been caught on camera. And that was my specialty because I was really big into surveillance, and I figured with the technology that I had available, the mindset I had to defeat the thinking of these creatures, I thought within 2 years I'd get it. Your typical game cameras bolt onto a tree using regular digital cameras now, ultrasonic detection or PIR detection, passive infrared. Pretty much widely available now. Some of the different pictures through game cameras, black and white, a lot of blurry ones. You name it, you know, the jacklegs, Bigfoot too. Game cam variations, they have different types of game cams now that are cellular. I had some in West Virginia that when it went off, it called my cell phone and sent me 2 pictures immediately. So even if someone destroyed the camera, the pictures would be on the cell phone. Those are pretty nice cameras. They're still making them. They're actually getting better, and they're becoming more noticeable in the game camera field. But the typical limits with the game camera coverage, the camera field of view is usually 54 degrees. Pretty much that's it. You're looking out 54 degrees. The PIR detection upon motion and heat activation is about 40 feet. Some are 70 feet. So what you have is basically a pie-shaped wedge that you're looking out at. And that's it. You're not looking behind you, not looking to the sides. Detection is only in that 54 degrees. The forest coverage in the United States, about 30% of the 2.3 billion acres of land area in the U.S. Is forested today as compared to about 1/2 in the 1630s. Some 300 million acres of forest land have been converted to other uses since 1630s, predominantly the agriculture in the east. The areas here, you can see the colors with the green, forest land, deciduous. There's a lot of trees, especially along the east coast and Pacific Northwest, and also southwest Texas. Over the last 5 years have been deployed, maintained. That would mean there's 6,250,000 game cameras in operation. So you would think with that coverage, we should be getting pictures with all those cameras out there. That's if they're all out there. A lot of times you buy a game camera, use it a few times, it goes on the shelf, they don't worry about it anymore. So if all those cameras were out there, you'd cover a lot. Why haven't we got a picture of the creatures yet? You would think with all those cameras that someone would have gotten a picture. But what happens here, it's all in the numbers. It's a numbers game. What I did was calculate the pie-shaped section and multiply that with square feet, and then multiply that times the amount of cameras that are supposedly deployed after 5 years. And that comes down to a total square mile coverage of 183 square miles, which you think is, wow, that's pretty big. But when you look at it, with all the national forests, or the forested land in the United States, it only comes out to 0.5% of all that coverage. So even though with those cameras out there, it's a fraction, it's a sliver of what is out there. This is pretty much that 183 square miles. This is the area around Hungry Mother State Park. So if all those cameras were put up back to back so that all those slices lined up, all the cameras sold in the last 5 years would basically cover that area around Hungry Mother State Park. When you're looking at it from higher up, the red square is that total square footage. So there's not a lot being covered, you know. So, you know, when people say, why haven't we seen these creatures on film? That's a perfect example of what's going on. We only have a fraction of the area, which is only 0.8 or 0.5 with the typical game cameras. When we go to time-lapse cameras, that's a whole different beast. They're similar to game cameras, but the time-lapse cameras, again, have a single field of view, but they go out as far as you can see. So they're recording, you can program it to record every 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. But I'm using the plot watchers, the ones on the left. And those can be put in a tree. They take a picture every 5 seconds. They go for 6 weeks, from an hour before sunup to an hour after sundown. And every 5 seconds they take a picture. Boom, 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 like that. So it's never a PIR sensor where they don't have PIR sensor. It just keeps taking photos. So whatever comes in the field of view, you're going to capture. Pretty interesting stuff. This is the plot watcher again. It could be programmed for a picture every 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whenever you want to do it. Saves it to an SD card. It will work in nighttime if you're in a barn or you have a lighting source. This is a typical Plot Watcher Pro video. I'll show you real quick. It's got a couple ducks and a blue heron in it. It's not working. Yikes. It could be a way it was transferred to this computer. All right, I'm going to have to pass it that one. But what happened here was this camera system, I deployed it where I was living, and it was a sequential camera system array. And these cameras would just, that whole field of view would be recorded for about 6 weeks. I'm going to see if I can bring it up through this one. Nope. Here's a bird's eye view of the camera, the sequential array that I had. I used 8 of those game cameras, the plot watchers, and I would deploy them so the first camera would look at the second to third to fourth, and would go for 1/3 of a mile up this creek. So if anything crossed over that creek, an hour before sunrise, an hour after sunset, it would be caught on this camera system. It was sort of an invisible fence line that I was going to try to get some funding and take it out and do more research with the Bigfoot creatures using it. Here's a close-up of the property showing where the cameras were positioned. Again, 1 looking at 2, 2 looking at 3. So along that whole line, you have that 1/3 mile of coverage. These were the cameras where they were positioned, 1 through 8. You can't see the camera that it's looking at because it's so small in the field of view. But if someone walked up to the other camera down, the next camera down, you would have seen them walking up to it. Let's see if this works. No. For some reason, the transfer file didn't make it active. But that was camera 1. That's camera 2 looking at camera 3. That's 4, actually 4 looking at 5. 5 looking at 6. 6 and 7. That was moving it when I was setting it up. Camera 7 looking at 8. Camera 8. This is an interesting thing because it can animals sense cameras? And this sort of goes back to Culpeper, where I found out that the animals can sense ultrasonic sounds. I was able to bypass most of that sound so that the animals couldn't see it. But this was interesting because there was a bull up the creek a little bit that walked down the creek, and you might be able to see him. That's a picture of him coming closer. He's actually smelling right in front of the camera. And then this one, he's looking at the camera. And he came from like 100 feet upstream. And he just sort of meandered down the stream and came right here. Pretty interesting that the camera picked up these shots. It's just amazing. But you know, he's looking at something. And I think the camera, he was able to sense it somehow. With his nose, I think he did smell it, and I think he could detect the electrical sounds or the ultrasonic sounds. He turned around before he went up the creek, proceeded to go to the bathroom right in front of the camera, said goodbye, and then he headed up the creek. So I think he sort of left his calling card there. But if you utilize the standard game cameras, it comes up to 0.5% of the total square coverage of forest land in the United States. If you go to the plot watchers, you're talking about 0.88%. So you bring it up a little bit, but even with that greater field of view, it's still a sliver if all of those cameras were deployed. So it's a very interesting puzzle because, you know, you can't saturate the woods with enough cameras. So I think the best way to do is get all the information from the sightings, correlate what time, where they were, and then try to put up cameras that are well camouflaged with natural camouflage, nothing man-made. The tapes and things, the camo tapes, they're great, but when you look in at the cameras and the camcorders in the ultraviolet range, which animals can see, the ultraviolet looks like a bright white, and also near-infrared cameras look bright white. They found out that coyotes, things like that, can see in the ultraviolet and near-infrared. And just like the shirt, if you look at it in ultraviolet or near-infrared, this shirt will be white. It's the dyes they use and things like that. It reflects ultraviolet from the sun. And what was very interesting doing this research, when you bring the camera outside, everything looks very dark. It's like a very cloudy day. But what it is the ultraviolet and near-infrared is used by all the plants as energy, so it's not reflecting back. But if you put a game camera out there on a tree, the background would be like a cloudy day, very dark, but that game camera would look bright white. So I think if animals, maybe these creatures could see into those wavelengths, it's possible they could see it, hear it. Also, if you have a game camera and you bring your local AM radio station close to it, when the game camera's on, it'll basically just cancel the radio signals on that radio, so you won't hear anything. You can turn the game camera on and off. You turn it off, the radio station comes in, turn the game camera on, the radio station. So that energy is radiating out, just like Russell talked about. Also, the ultrasonic is going out. So there's a combination of emissions that are emanating from these cameras that we can't see or hear. So we assume they're pretty cool. They look great with camouflage. So it's a pretty interesting technology. And when you learn about animals, they're pretty smart. And I think they could sense some of this stuff. Wanted to thank Helen Shaw. She's from Sheridan, Arkansas. She helped with the presentation. She did all the math with the forested land and all that sort of stuff. So I had to thank her for that. Some of the things I'd like to talk about here real quick is the cameras. These are the time-lapse cameras. This is the plot watcher, which is pretty nice. It's got the 8 batteries. This will last for about 6 weeks in the woods. It'll picture every 5 seconds from sun up to sundown. Just take the SD card out, plug another one in, and throw it back in. One of the other things to bring in the woods is when you go out hiking and researching is the audio recorder. And you should have it on all the time. You hear stories about the people coming into a sighting area and hear children playing. That's typical. And I've been in that situation where you hear like the chatter of kids playing and laughing. And if you don't turn this on, before you get out of the car, you might miss it. It's usually when you open the door and you step out, you hear that. A few seconds later, you don't. But these things are good for doing the audio recording. You can do separate mics too, which are really good. Just a regular cheap camera instead of your cell phone, because if you see a Bigfoot creature, you're putting your cell phone out there, doing your code. It takes 5 seconds, 10 seconds, by then it's gone. So carry a regular camera. Or there's a camera system called Deja Vu, which is filming all the time. It goes on your head, on your hat. That's filming all the time, and it just keeps overwriting everything. So, but when you see something, you hit a little button on the side of the camera, and it records about 30 seconds prior. So as long as you can remember to hit the button, that's a pretty good system. And they're coming out with some more elaborate systems along that same line. That was Deja Vu. The regular GPS is great because if you see something in the woods, like with the stick structures and things like that, you take a GPS. I made a formula to take out how many sticks are in the circle, the perimeter. The largest stick, maybe something that's coming off the side that's not typical of the other ones. I made a program to program it in here where I could put those different tree formations on a plot and find out how tall they were, where the tall ones are. And it seemed like from just the simple research I did, the farther away from people, the taller these tree structures were. And I've seen tree structures about 3 feet and right alongside of it, maybe 6 to 8 inches. Exactly the same as the other one, like a adolescent was building. Very, very weird, but that's what you find out in the woods. I think the new way for for the game cameras. This is a spherical camera made by Samsung. This is a 360-degree camera that could look up to the ceiling, see that fan. It could look all the way down, see the floor, it sees everybody in this room. This one is from South Korea because it was the only place I could buy it right away. And when new technology comes out, I sort of got to have it. But the idea with this camera is it sees 360, where all these other cameras, single field of view, that's all you see. What I'm developing now is a PIR sensor that actually screws underneath. It'll be a 360 PIR sensor. It'll have batteries in it. It'll have an app for your phone where you could program your PIR sensor to distances and things. But when something comes within about 100 feet, it'll actually wireless, because these are Bluetooth, it'll send that signal up here to turn the camera on, take a 30-second video, and go back to sleep. So it's a pretty small footprint, and instead of the single field of view, you get 360, up, down, everywhere. So if something trips it, you're going to get it. But the Samsung is great, but it's not waterproof, so to speak, water resistant. So you still have to put an enclosure around it. And when I tried doing that, the lens distorted, so you can't do anything. I found out through the grapevine that Nikon is coming out with a 360 camera, very similar to this, same size, but that one's all weatherproofed. And that could go down to 100 feet in depth underwater, which sort of lends itself to lake monster research that I do too. But what happens is this camera can transmit, say if you're in your tent at night or during the day, you could put this outside your tent, transmit to your cell phone wirelessly, and you could actually view 360 degrees all around your campsite. Or you could have it record on the internal memory what's going on all day long. It's a time-lapse camera, the snapshots, everything else. So I think this is where the technology is going for research, for 360 spherical, for underwater, lake monster stuff. The waterproof camera by Nikon would be great because you could actually submerge the camera underwater. You could use the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi through a special proximity Wi-Fi antenna to transmit that signal all the way up to the boat. So this thing could be down up to 100 feet. If you have like a painter's extension pole, you could drop that thing in the water, put on the virtual reality glasses, and you become the center point of this camera, where you look is what that camera is seeing. So for treasure hunters and things, I think that would be invaluable. Pull a boat around and look down there and find something. But for lake monster stuff, it's pretty cool too. It gives you that sense of being underwater without having to be towed by a boat. Let's see, the casts here. These are some simple casts I'm going to start selling soon. This is a Patterson Bluff Creek, 1967. Pretty popular cast. This is the Yeti, the Abominable Snowman for the Himalayas. This is part of the Shipton expedition where you see that photograph of a foot. And an artist actually went back and constructed one out of clay. And it was donated to Lauren Coleman at the Cryptozoology Museum up in Maine. He sent it to me. I actually made the silicone mold for it from that original and sent it back up to him so he could produce them and sell them. So I'm going to go ahead and start producing these two. Patterson footage, the cast, this is a clear. It gives you a different area of what the foot looks like from the top down. Alita came up with some interesting information on the foot itself, and we should talk to her about it that she discovered, because I sent her a cast along with some t-shirts she bought, and she raised a very good point about a fat deposit on the side of the foot and how it bulged out. And it wasn't until she saw this cast that she made that discovery. And it's a pretty big discovery too, so we're going to talk about it later, but it wasn't until she got the cast that she saw that and observed it and knew exactly what it was, when no one else has ever talked about it doing research. This is a cast made by a friend of mine. He works a lot with plastics and silicone molds. He just wanted to find how difficult or how easy it was to come up with a foot that had like a live foot where the toes would move and things like that. So he made it out of silicone where you could flex the toes a little bit from each step. But it came out pretty well. Once you take a casting of it, it actually looks pretty real. So it's easy to hoax stuff. So you really got to be careful out there. That's why the trackways are good, so it shows a continuous line. I think that's, trying to determine hoax from the real thing is getting tougher and tougher every day because there's so many people that are hoaxing. So I think that's about it. But, one thing, get out in the woods, spend time out there, bring your family out there if you can. The cameras, I've been working with them for years, and I have a couple images of something 10 feet tall, but it's a very dark image from Atoka, Virginia. And I would say keep going out and looking and being more aware of the woods. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, but a friend of mine put a camera on his shoulder and filmed backwards, and he ended up finding a leg coming out from behind a tree as he was walking by. And he had moved at that same time, so you see this leg coming out, and then he moved, and he didn't capture the rest. But he said that tree was no more than 15 feet from him. And you see this large foot and leg come out like that. It's like, whoop. So pretty neat stuff. But get out in the woods when you can. For the people that discount these creatures exist, they do exist. I know that for a fact myself, even though I don't have the physical photos, the evidence itself. I wish I did, but I've had the experience, and it's the real deal. And when you talk to a lot of these people, their lives have changed too. They really just want to figure out what's going on. And that's why you have to, like Billy, doing the expeditions and talking to people. You got to get out there and get people to talk. And that's why you guys are here. So if you have family members that have seen these and you don't believe them, sort of tend that they're probably telling the truth. You can tell through the eyes if they're telling the truth. So the eyes are the window to the soul. But, don't discount these sightings, and don't discount the quantity of sightings, because I think these creatures are all over the place. They live in close proximity to where we are, except they're out at night most of the time. They're ninjas of the woods, basically. They know how to operate. They know all about you. They utilize the other animals, their warning signals, their sounds, to basically the sensors. So they're very, very smart. I think they're pretty passive, unless you mess with them. They don't want to be found. They don't want a posse coming after them. So, but again, thanks for coming out. And I thank Billy for having the conference. And he deserves a big round of applause. So,
If anybody has any questions for Bill, he can take a couple questions.
Have you ever talked to the manufacturers about, kind of silencing their cameras?
No.
Spectrums?
I didn't because I was more interested in doing that myself.
Okay.
The idea was if I could catch Bigfoot, I could catch anyone. So then to the surveillance industry. So I thought that was a niche I had. But that's when I did the research and learned about it myself and said, I could fix this. That's when I came up with the I Gotcha cameras that didn't produce any sounds. It was all tested electromagnetically, enclosed rooms, screen rooms, things like that, make sure they weren't emitting anything. But I still haven't gotten any video with those.
Wow.
So, but again, it's still a little sliver in the book.
Right.
But
Are you selling that? Yeah, I got you.
they spent $20,000 on getting some made, but they cost so much money to produce that I would have to sell them for $2,500.
Okay.
I sold one to the night vision lab in Fort Belvoir, and that was it. But they ended up catching somebody hopping the fence off the Potomac River from the boat and stealing Humvee parts off of the Humvee. So I thought when my representative called me and said, "This is great. You caught somebody with your system with a thermal camera hooked up to it because it adapted with any camera." And I said, "We got it. We got a contract. Nothing. He says, "I think they reverse engineered it and they're producing something." Sounds sort of typical of what sometimes they do. So, but it was just so costly. It just hurt. And the technology advancing so quickly, it wasn't worth the time or the money to stay focused in one product.
Right.
You keep advancing. So that's what I'm still advancing.
Yeah, of course it is. How much is the nighttime? The nighttime going to cost?
It's going to be about $400.
That's not bad.
And then the PIR sensor, maybe 200, something like that. And then the app that will go with it to talk to it.
Right, cool.
Yeah. Sir?
We have some phenomenal orbital capabilities, both in visual, infrared, UV, and the ability to track any target once it is located. Is anyone using that capability in the hunt for Bigfoot that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. That's sort of high tech. It is not accessible to your average person. I know I was asked to start up with the Falcon project where they were using a high altitude balloon. That was a number of years ago. I got out of there because the drones were coming on board, and it was easier to put a drone up than a length the size of a tennis court. And they were also going pretty high. They were going up, they wanted to go 12,000 feet. And even with that, any movement, that camera was going to be going back and forth. But there's a lot of other things going on up there with temperatures, humidity, unbalanced bladder systems, things like that. And high winds, I didn't think it would work. I told them, I said we should concentrate on drones, and smaller helium drones, and things like that. But they wanted to go with the bigger, more larger size, heavier payload, more advertising capability, generate more funds. So that's why I bailed. I said, it's a waste of time. I'm not going to go that route. But eventually, the Falcon project dissolved, unfortunately. And then that larger drone, it's a dual bladder drone over in England, that just crashed a couple days ago. So again, the lighter than aircraft, it's not working out. The drones are doing good. Popping the drone up pretty quickly, doing a search, that sort of thing. One thing I wanted to do with the drones was the follow me tag, where you would throw the tag on a dog, and the dog would become the home GPS. The dog would go out, the drone would follow it, and then you'd be like 500 feet above. So if you have a tracking dog that can track these things, the drone will follow it. Then you drop the drone down, and my thought was, not people didn't like it, but I thought it was cool. You would actually, if you get close enough, you get this creature on video, and then fly the drone right into the creature. Really, all you're going to do, you're not shooting it or killing it, you're hitting it with the drone. People have been hit. You do get cut. It'll grab some hair. You'll get DNA samples. The creature will be upset, but it's not killing it or anything else. You got the video coming in, you got the impact, you got pieces flying all over the place, you got blood, you have some hair, there's your DNA. It's on record. So it's sort of a kamikaze type thing, but it sure beats killing them. But I don't think anybody's going to get to that point where, but they may. With these new racing drones that fly at a zillion miles an hour, they may be able to zoom in and knock them down.
So what's your current thinking about the creature seeing the infrared cone on camera?
Infrared cone. The infrared illumination?
Yes.
I think it's possible to see it. A lot of the FBI agents I talked to, they could hear getting cameras. When they were in the situations, they could even regular cameras, security cameras, they could hear them. Some of them, not all of them. But their senses are so tuned, they could hear the camera humming. They could walk through a department store and just go 1, 2, 3, 4. The infrared, near infrared, the 620, 680 nanometer, people could still see that. You have to get up to the 980, what they call black light, where humans can't see it. But I still think the creatures can't see it. So, yes.
No marine, so like in the marine, have you ever done any research on the
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, I have access to that area. And I've asked a few people down there, and there's it's mostly all truth that's going on. The stories are still there. Billy knows that there's been some action down there too in the last 6, 7 years. So yeah, there's still something going on there. It's also the Prince William Forest Park area that connects. There's still a lot of stuff going on down there too. I have a number of sightings. I have 2 sightings from this location here on my website if you want to look at it. One of the gentlemen that had a sighting here, he was in a canoe looking up at the hillside, saw this big hairy creature. He started paddling towards it and took off running up the hill. And this gentleman wouldn't give me his name, but he says, I'm fairly well known in town. I don't want to give you my name, but this is what we saw. So, pretty interesting. It's a beautiful park. I can see it. This is a great habitat for this creature.
Bill, thank you.